Most people don't know. The war nobody is watching in the Sahel just changed everything. Most people do not know that the most consequential military realignment of 2026 is not happening in the Middle East, not happening in the Taiwan Strait, not happening in the Black Sea. It is happening in a region that most Western viewers cannot locate on a map, in a conflict that receives less media coverage than a celebrity divorce, and it has just produced a strategic outcome that will reshape the global competition for resources, military influence, and great power access across an entire continent. The Sahel, that vast band of semi-arid territory stretching across Africa from Senegal to Sudan, encompassing Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, and the Central African Republic, has just completed the most dramatic security realignment in African history. And the result is that France, the colonial power that controlled this region for over a century, has been expelled. The United States, which maintained drone bases and special operations forces across the zone, has been evicted. And the country that has replaced them both, the country now providing military advisors, weapons, intelligence, and security guarantees to the Sahel's military governments, is Russia. What just happened in the Sahel has not been reported anywhere in Western mainstream media with the seriousness it deserves. And by the end of this video, you will understand why this matters more than any headline you have read this week. How did France lose control of a region it has dominated since the 19th century? What specific capabilities is Russia deploying across the Sahel, and what does Moscow gain from it? Why did the United States lose its drone bases in Niger? And what does that loss mean for American counterterrorism operations across North and West Africa? And what does the Sahel realignment reveal about the global competition for Africa's resources that will determine the industrial future of every major economy? Stay with us. If you want the real story behind the forgotten war, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Drop your thoughts in the comments. The Sahel is not strategically important because of its current economic output, which is modest by global standards. The Sahel is strategically important because of what lies beneath its soil. Niger alone produces approximately 7% of the world's uranium supply, uranium that has fueled France's nuclear power fleet for decades, generating over 70% of French electricity from reactors that depend on Nigerian yellowcake. Mali contains an estimated $46 billion in untapped gold, lithium, iron ore, and bauxite reserves. Burkina Faso's gold production makes it one of the top 5 gold-producing countries in Africa. The Central African Republic sits atop diamond, uranium, and rare earth mineral deposits that have attracted resource competition from every major power. Chad's oil reserves, estimated at approximately 1.5 billion barrels, are exported primarily through a pipeline to the Cameroonian coast. These are not peripheral resources. These are the raw materials of the 21st century economy. The uranium that powers nuclear reactors, the lithium that builds electric vehicle batteries, the gold that central banks are stockpiling as insurance against dollar decline, the rare earth minerals that go into every advanced military system, from guided missiles to stealth fighter radar. Whoever controls access to these resources controls a significant piece of the industrial future. And that control has just shifted from west to east. France's expulsion from the Sahel has been a rolling humiliation executed across 3 years. In 2022, Mali expelled French forces that had been deployed since 2013 under Operation Barkhane, a counterterrorism mission that cost France over 1 billion euros per year and failed to prevent the expansion of jihadist groups across the region. In 2023, Burkina Faso followed, ordering French troops to leave within 30 days. In January 2024, Niger, the most strategically important French partner in the Sahel because of the uranium supply relationship, expelled French forces following a military coup that overthrew the French-aligned civilian government. In April 2026, Chad, the last remaining French military partner in the Sahel, announced the termination of its defense cooperation agreement with Paris and the closure of France's largest remaining military base in the region. The expulsion is complete. 127 years of French military presence in the Sahel, from the colonial campaigns of the 1890s through Operation Barkhane, ended not with a battle, but with a series of formal notifications delivered by military governments that had concluded, based on the evidence of a decade of failed French counterterrorism operations, that Paris could not deliver security and that its presence generated more resentment than protection. The replacement is Russia. The Africa Corps, the rebranded successor to the Wagner Group, now operates across Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, the Central African Republic, and as of recent reports is establishing presence in Chad. Russian military advisors provide training to Sahelian armed forces. Russian equipment, including Mi-35 attack helicopters, BTR-82A armored personnel carriers, and Pantsir S-1 short-range air defense systems, has been delivered to multiple Sahel governments. Russian intelligence support, including satellite imagery and signals intelligence shared from Russian military satellites, is being provided to Sahelian counterterrorism operations. In exchange, Russia receives mining concessions, preferential access to uranium and gold exports, diplomatic support in international forums, and most critically, the denial of a critical resource supply to Western competitors. The United States' loss is equally significant, though less publicized. The U.S. Air Force operated a major drone base at Agadez in Niger, Air Base 201, constructed at a cost of approximately $110 million, housing MQ-9 Reaper surveillance and strike drones that provided coverage across the central Sahel and into southern Libya. Following Niger's coup and subsequent realignment, the United States was forced to withdraw from Agadez, losing the primary intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance platform for American counterterrorism operations across West and Central Africa. The loss of Agadez creates a surveillance void, approximately 2,000 kilometers wide across the Central Sahara, a void that jihadist organizations affiliated with al-Qaeda and the Islamic State are already exploiting to expand their operational reach. The weapon systems Russia is deploying across the Sahel are not premium platforms. They are effective, robust, and cheap enough to be supplied at scale to governments with limited budgets. The Mi-35M attack helicopter provides close air support capability at a fraction of the cost of Western alternatives. The BTR-82A armored personnel carrier gives Sahelian armies protected mobility in terrain where ambushes by jihadist groups have killed thousands of soldiers. The Kornet anti-tank guided missile provides infantry with the ability to destroy armored vehicles and fortified positions at ranges up to 5.5 kilometers. These are not transformative technologies. They are adequate technologies, supplied by a partner that does not condition its support on democratic governance, human rights compliance, or the kind of political interference that made French and American partnership increasingly intolerable to Sahelian military leaders. In Beijing, the Sahel realignment is being observed with strategic interest. China has invested over $40 billion in African infrastructure through the Belt and Road Initiative and has extensive mining operations across the continent. A Sahel aligned with Russia and hostile to Western interests creates opportunities for Chinese resource access that would have been complicated by French colonial influence. In Washington, the loss of the Sahel is being processed as a counterterrorism setback rather than a strategic realignment, a framing that fundamentally misunderstands the scale of what has occurred. In Paris, the humiliation is being masked by diplomatic language about evolving partnerships and the importance of African sovereignty, language that fools no one who understands that France has just lost access to the uranium that powers its nuclear reactors and the military influence that sustained its claim to great power status. In Moscow, the Sahel is being celebrated as the most cost-effective strategic acquisition in modern Russian history. Military influence across 5 African nations, access to uranium, gold, and rare earth minerals, and the expulsion of 2 NATO powers from an entire region, achieved with a few thousand military advisors and several $billion in equipment, a fraction of what France and the United States spent over the same period for worse results. First, the Sahel realignment is the most significant shift in African security alignment since decolonization, replacing a century of French military dominance with Russian partnership in a resource-rich region that will supply the raw materials of the 21st century economy. Second, the loss of Niger's uranium supply threatens France's energy sovereignty because 70% of French electricity depends on nuclear power fueled by uranium that increasingly flows to Russian-aligned supply chains rather than French ones. Third, the loss of Agadez Air Base creates a 2,000-kilometer surveillance void across the Central Sahara that jihadist organizations will exploit, potentially regenerating the terrorist threat that the French and American interventions were designed to prevent. Fourth, Russia's strategy in the Sahel demonstrates that great power competition in Africa will be won not by the country with the most expensive military equipment, but by the country willing to provide security assistance without political conditions, a model that is deeply attractive to military governments across the developing world. This is the story they did not want you to see. Not because it was classified, not because it was sensitive, because seeing it clearly requires admitting that two NATO powers, France and the United States, with combined defense budgets exceeding $1 trillion per year, were outmaneuvered across an entire continent by a Russian operation costing perhaps $2 to $3 billion. The war nobody is watching just determined who controls Africa's uranium, Africa's gold, Africa's lithium, and Africa's rare earth minerals for the next generation. And the winners are not the countries that spent the most or talked the loudest about rules and values. The winners are the countries that showed up, that offered what was wanted rather than what they thought should be wanted, and that understood that in the 21st century, influence is not commanded, it is earned. Now you have seen it. The question is what you do with what you now know. What do you think the West should do about Africa? Re-engage, compete with Russia, or accept the loss? Drop your honest answer in the comments. We read every single one. If this analysis opened your eyes, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Until next time, stay sharp.